Hi and welcome to our latest episode of Carpool Readeoke. We're so lucky today to have the wonderful author L.D Lapinski. How are you doing? Thanks for coming in today.
Wow, it's really brilliant. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, thank you so much.
This is the first proper video that I've done for actual proper readers, so yeah, I'm so excited.
Oh, that's amazing. So you're so lucky out there today. and you've got your book with you today.
I have. I brought with me, and I must say, for the sake of people who like pretty things, this is not the final cover. I had to glue this on earlier because this is actually a proof copy. And
wow.
The finished copies don't even exist yet.
Wow.
I know.
Oh, you're doubly lucky to be watching this video then.
Yeah, so this is the Strange Worlds Travel Agency, and it's about a girl called Flick who discovers this dusty old travel agency on the high street that looks a little bit dull, a little bit grim, maybe like it might have a bit of a weird smell. But she's drawn to it. She can't leave it alone. She really wants to find out what's inside it. Goes in and it's full of all these old suitcases. Why is this travel agency full of old suitcases? It's because if you step into one of those suitcases, each one of those suitcases will take you to another world.
Wow. Oh, fantastic. Can we hear a little bit?
You can hear a little bit,
oh,
yes.
Fantastic.
Now I'm going to read from, we have met the owner of the travel agency at this point. His name is Jonathan, and he's very grumpy and sarcastic and a bit of a loner. And he thinks he's fine on his own, but he's not really. Beside the church, leaning drunkenly into the alleyway, was a tiny, squashed-looking shop with a big bay window. It had a shiny black door and a corner porch with a stone step so worn it appeared to be melting into the pavement. Flick looked up at the sign. The Strange Worlds Travel Agency. Something prickled under her skin. The feeling wasn't unpleasant. If she'd had to describe it, she would have said it was curiosity mixed with oranges. She felt her fingers curl into her palms in an involuntary clench that sent a sort of electric feeling through her bones. She wanted to get closer to that shop. She couldn't say exactly why. The travel agency, if that's what it really was, looked the same as the other shops on the street. Old, unpopular, rather unloved, and as though it might have a bit of a weird smell, but it did have fresh red and gold paint spelling out its name, and a gleaming glossy globe at the each end of the sign. There was also a brass plaque beside the door, though at this distance Flick couldn't make out what it said. Her legs, moving almost without permission, took her across the cobblestone road and up to the shop door before she could think of a reason not to. The porch had a bit of an overhang to shelter people from the rain, and once under it, Flick felt as though she was standing in a little cocoon. She brushed her hand against the sandy brickwork, and some of the dusty masonry clung to her fingers. She rubbed it off on the leg of her jeans and touched the brass plaque bolted to the outside wall. It was dented and scratched. It had also been vandalised. The letters were scoured as though they had been attacked with a chisel. Flick could just make out the letters O-C-I-E-T-Y. She studied the big bay window. The glass, shining in the sunlight, seemed to look back at her. And Flick realised the shop really wasn't so grubby after all. It was sort of beautiful. Like a book that's been read so many times the cover has fallen off and the pages have started to curl, or a soft bear that's had all of its fur loved away. Flick felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. There was a soft, affectionate feeling growing in her chest that she couldn't explain, like the feeling you get when you see a photograph of a person taken before you met them. You recognise them, and you know you're going to meet them someday, but it's as though they're not quite ready. Not yet. She put a hand on the door and pushed. The door swung open easily, and she stepped in after it, catching it before it could bang against the wall. It closed softly behind her, letting out a dusty sigh as it settled back into place. Flick looked around. She had never seen anywhere that looked less like a travel agency in her life. The air was slightly dusty, almost as though the place seemed to have a sepia filter thrown over it. The wall to Flick's left was a mosaic of luggage. Dozens of different sized suitcases were slotted into perfectly proportioned holes of varnished dark wood, Only one single cavity was empty. To her right, in the corner behind the door, was a glass and wood cabinet stuffed to bursting with books and files and tiny knickknacks, and a glass case of insects. Beside this corner cabinet was a stretch of wood-panelled wall that was home to a dozen photographs in dark, heavy frames. The pictures were all of people. Flick frowned as she looked at them closely. There were tiny brass plaques beneath each picture, with barely readable names engraved into them. To the back of the room there was a bookcase, stuffed into a corner beneath the stairs, and in front of the bookcase was a desk. There was enough space between it and the bookcase for a leather-cushioned swivel chair. The desk was littered with books and papers and a wrapper from a packet of custard creams. Gooseflesh rose on Flick's arms as she stared at the suitcases, the twin armchairs either side of the empty fireplace to the right, and the mantelpiece with a synchronous of clocks on the top of it. There was a faint smell of blown-out candle and something like damp paper. It felt familiar and new at the same time. It felt like somewhere she probably shouldn't be, and yet Flick didn't even think once about going for the door. She walked carefully over to the mantelpiece. The clocks on it were all ticking at different speeds. The hands of some were whizzing around the faces, others seemed to barely be moving at all, and each one had a label. Cove of Voices, Flick read aloud. Aquata Minor, Crystal Forest. She picked up one of the clocks. The label on it read, 5 Light City. It was ticking merrily and quickly. It was small, black and round like a cartoon alarm clock, but so heavy and greasy that when she turned it over, it immediately slipped from her fingers. She scrambled and bent to catch it just before it could crash onto a couple of leather-bound suitcases that were stacked between 2 chairs. She breathed a sigh of relief and shook her head at the clock as if it had decided to jump out of her hands on its own. She carefully put it back where it belonged. That was close. Flick jumped like she'd been stung and jumped around to see who had spoken. The shopkeeper, who was Jonathan Mercator, stood in the doorway between the travel agency's front room and the back. He was holding a china cup in one hand and a saucer in the other. There was a custard cream on the saucer. "May I help you?" he asked. Flick felt herself going extremely red. "I'm sorry about the clock. It didn't smash or anything. I was just looking around." "Well, mission accomplished," Jonathan said sarcastically. He put his cup and saucer down. "I've been suffering from a terrible lack of people coming in to waste my time. Thank heavens you arrived when you did, Miss Flick." Miss Flick? Flick Hudson. Well, Felicity, actually, but Hudson? Jonathan narrowed his eyes, and Flick had the impression he was trying to see through her eyes clean to the back of her head, and possibly several yards beyond it as well. "Any relation?" Flick blinked. "Well, I've got a mum and dad." No, I meant to Henry Hudson, the explorer." "Oh." Flick smiled, pleased to share a name with an explorer. "I don't know. Maybe." "Maybe. Well, that's good as a no, isn't it?" Jonathan picked up the custard cream and bit into it. "Did you want something?" he asked, mouth full. "Well, no, I was just walking past and—" He waved a hand at her to be quiet. "Very well, if you wouldn't mind." He pointed at the door with the remaining half of his biscuit. Flick stayed where she was. Her feet seemed extremely reluctant to move. She looked back at the suitcases. "What are all these bags for?" "We're a travel agency," Jonathan said, in the special voice people use when talking to children they think don't understand them. "The best in the world. Old family firm." "The best in the world," Flick repeated sceptically. "Yes, we send you where you want to go." He tapped the desk with a finger. "It isn't cheap." The vague smile evaporated off Flick's face. No doubt this young man lived in one of the huge posh houses they'd driven past on the way into the village. He probably had special poor person detection abilities. She shrugged, trying to look like that didn't matter to her. "Well, I didn't think it would be." "So don't linger on my account." Flick still didn't move. She looked back at the suitcases. They were very striking, but it didn't make sense for there to be so many of them in one travel agency. So you save people's bags until they go on a trip or something? Oh, no. Jonathan followed her gaze. No, these are all mine. Yours? Why are there so many? For the first time, Jonathan paused, searching for a believable lie the way one searches for their keys in an overstuffed bag. They're atmospheric. Flick folded her arms. Jonathan folded his arms right back, and he did it with a great more style. Was there anything else, miss? There wasn't, of course. But Flick still didn't leave. She went over to one of the smaller suitcase piles and reached for the one on the top. Don't touch that, Jonathan snapped. Why? She asked, instantly wanting to touch it and maybe write her name in the dust. Is it old? Well, yes, they all are. Look, I don't mean to be rude. Flick pulled an incredulous face. But this is my business, and I really don't see how I can help you. Seems to me like you're the one who needs help, she said, closing her mouth quickly after the words had escaped. Jonathan stared, his eyes boggling behind his glasses. I beg your pardon. Are you here on your own? Flick blurted out. Or are you looking after the place for your dad or something? I am here by myself. This is my travel agency. I inherited it. Flick wasn't entirely sure that sounded right. Don't you need to be 18 to inherit things? I am 18, Jonathan said indignantly. Really? Asked Flick disbelievingly. He didn't seem to be more than a couple of years older than she was. He was white, and his black hair seemed to be a stranger to combs and brushes, the soft dark curls coiled haphazardly over the arms of his glasses. He wasn't very tall, and he didn't look like he was shaving yet, but now she really stared at him, there was a sort of oldness in his eyes. She'd seen her mum's eyes like that, not long after Freddie, her baby brother, was born. They were the eyes of someone who wasn't sleeping and had too much to think about. Jonathan bit his bottom lip for a moment. If you must know, I'm the only one the shop could go to. I'm not awash with family. Flick didn't know what to say to that. She suddenly felt rather guilty about her questions. I'm sorry. Whatever for? Well, if you inherited it... The implication hung in the air. Jonathan let her words fester for a moment before nodding. Thank you. There was an uneasy silence. Flick brightened, a solution popping into her head. You could do with an assistant. An assistant? Jonathan spluttered. I don't employ people, not even for a summer job, and especially not some child who's wandered in from goodness knows where. And another thing. Flick's face burned with embarrassment. She hadn't expected a delighted yes and a handshake, but this boy seemed to enjoy going out of his way to be hurtful and rude. She focused on her shoes to hide her face, concentrating on the dusty floorboards and the spilled ash coming from the fireplace. But then, something caught her eye. She blinked in surprise. In the grate of the fire, she could see several pieces of broken glass, smashed. She knelt down to see them more clearly. Jonathan was bustling round his desk, still wittering away. I am perfectly capable of running this place by myself, and more to the point, this isn't a child-friendly environment. I appreciate you think we've formed some sort of deep, sentimental bond in the last 4 minutes, but... He trailed off as Flick stood, a piece of glass between her fingers. The room seemed to have gone very, very still, as if even the dust motes were frozen in the stuffy air. What's this from? She asked, turning the glass over in her fingers. It was very thick and smooth, and there was something pleasing about holding it. Be careful, Jonathan said. It's sharp. Feels nice. Flick lifted it up to see better. In the fractured triangle of glass, something glittered.
Ooh, what is that something?
What is that something? You'll have to read on if you want to find out what the something is.
What amazing, amazing text. And sneak preview for all of you there. I know thank you so much
You're
for reading. I
welcome.
know lots of children want to read on. Well, I want to read on to find out. If you want to read on, when's the book out?
It's going to be out on the 30th of April. It's with Hachette. It's available in paperback, ebook and audiobook.
Oh, fantastic.
Which won't be read by me, so you don't have to suffer through me reading yet again.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Carpool Readeoke. Bye-bye.
Bye.